Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Father, we thank you so much for today. Pray that you will bless us this day and help us, give us wisdom to make sense of the things that are going on around us in a very turbulent and really an insane time to be alive in this world. Bless us today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I said this at the beginning when I taught first hour, so I'm going to follow it up here too. A number of people have expressed concern about my coughing, that type of thing. I have a thing called GERD, G-E-R-D. It causes it, in me, it manifests itself in coughing. And I've really struggled with it over the last year. I've been dealing with this for about 25 years. I've had multiple tests. I take some medications for it, but change in seasons and that type of thing really make it difficult. So I'd appreciate your prayers, and I couldn't do all the suggested tools for dealing with it that people have sent me because I can't eat and drink that much stuff. But I appreciate that. Just pray that it resolves. And I'm trying some different things this week. So anyway, in my Facebook feed this morning, they have these little things that say, hey, this is a memory from 5 years ago today. So 5 years ago today, I did a prophecy update, and I called it, I Don't Know Where to Begin. And so I changed it a little bit for today, just because the last thing I was thinking about was a creative title. And so I'm going to call it Still Not Knowing Where to Begin. Now, I taught first hour. You should be able to find that on the Fellowship Bible Chapel YouTube channel. I talked about the Enneagram and sort of how it's a touch point, a focus point for a lot of false teaching coming into the church in these days. And that title is called Practice Biblical Distancing. So you can find that on our YouTube channel. But here in our prophecy update, we talk about this convergence of events, of things that we're going to know that are going to happen in the last periods of human history, but that are certainly casting shadows back towards where we are. And again, I make reference to these covers from Foreign Policy magazine, which are now probably 6 or 7 years old. Can we fix this in a world disrupted? I don't know in terms of the coronavirus. I'm going to speak about that in a moment. I don't think I've ever seen a more complex, divisive issue. Before I forget about it, I will just say this. Everybody has an opinion about what caused it, what's it going to do, who's right, who's wrong. What my concern is that people are sort of adding their view of how this virus should be dealt with by people, and they're sort of incorporating that into the canon of what you need to believe or not believe to be a good Christian. And I think that's unfortunate. This is a very, very complex issue. I've bounced back and forth as to how I think people should handle it. It's disruptive. So I thought that rather than jump into the coronavirus thing, I would deal with something that's much easier to explain in terms of what's going on, and that's Israeli politics. Now, that ought to tell you something about how complex the coronavirus issue is when Israeli politics is easy to explain as to what's going on in that crazy system that they have. So just to kind of update you, it now appears that they have been able to get a deal together. There's still some things they're working out. At least they were when I got here to church this morning to speak. But it appears that they have a deal to form a government, which will allow for 18 months, Prime Minister Netanyahu will continue in the prime minister role, and Benny Gantz, whose party Blue and White, which was really a collection of several parties, broke up. And so Gantz took his 15 or 16 mandates, or people that were on his list, that if I get it, they make up a list. They might have 25 people on the list, and then depending how many votes they get, if they get a certain percentage of votes, they'll have 20 people. If they only get a certain number, they'll have 15. So he has 15 or 16 that have moved with him. He'll be appointed initially as the Speaker of the Knesset. And then he will step into the role of prime minister. It appears that during the 18 months that Netanyahu will remain prime minister, that Gantz, who's a former head of the Israeli Defense Force, will get the defense ministry portfolio. When Netanyahu moves over out of the prime minister role in 18 months, he will get the foreign minister role, is my understanding. But this is something to change. But early in the week, and you see a little picture of Edelman, who was elected, he's been the Speaker of the Knesset for a while. And there was this huge controversy. The Supreme Court came in and said, you have to start the Knesset, you have to hold the vote, you have to do this. And so the overreaching by the judiciary in Israeli politics and legal system and constitutional issues is very similar to the same thing we have with overreaching by judges in our system, although it's worse. So I thought what I would do at the beginning, I have about a 6 or 7 minute video of a discussion at the Center for Security Policy, Secure Freedom YouTube channel with Caroline Glick, who explains some of the issues. Now, this was recorded earlier in the week before the deal, but she'll explain a little bit about what's going on with the Supreme Court and how this is a major constitutional crisis for Israel. In fact, early in the week, I heard people talking about, excuse me, people talking about even to the extent that there might be civil war in Israel because everything had gotten so convoluted. And then now we're doing all this Knesset thing while everybody's pretty much on lockdown. People can't even get out to protest what's going on because Israel's on maybe even a more severe lockdown than some of the places in the United States dealing with this virus. So I want you to listen to Caroline Glick explain a bit about what's going on with Israeli politics, knowing that now it appears that they have a deal. And if it sounds confusing to you, wait, we'll get to the confusing part about the coronavirus in just a minute. So here's Caroline Glick, interviewed the other day about Israeli politics.
Caroline, coronavirus is hitting Israel in the middle of a political crisis. After 2 inconclusive elections, after Prime Minister Netanyahu's failure to be able to form a government. And I understand there was a recent effort, it may have been within the last 24 hours, where the doors of the Knesset were shuttered in defiance of a court order, which is preventing the formation of a new government. And I think people in the United States are very confused about this. What is your comment on the political situation in Israel right now?
I just want to make one parenthetical point about Corona, which I think is also important. When you look at Israel, you also have to see us in our region. And one of the interesting things or maybe horrible things that we're seeing in our region is that Israel really is surrounded by states with minimal capacity to deal with crises. So we're going to have dramatic events in Egypt in one way or another. Lebanon and Iran are collapsing. They've not been interested in investing money in their own societies, rather, in allowing the terrorists and terrorist ideals to lead them. So they're collapsing. So there are going to be a lot of different strategic shifts inside of the region that Israel's going to be operating in, also regardless of the state of our economy. And as to our political system, look, we are in the midst of multiple crises related to our politics. One of them is that we have a situation where, yes, we've had now 3 inconclusive elections. And after this past election, which was extremely tribal in the voting, you have something that's been unprecedented in Israeli political history, which is that the head of the center-left bloc is using an alliance with a very anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, pro-terrorist joint Arab list that openly supports Iran and Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, Hezbollah, in trying to oust Netanyahu with them. And they're making all kinds of deals with them about leadership positions in Knesset committees that are deleterious to Israel's national security in order to achieve this goal. So this is something we've never seen before. We've never seen a major party in Israel that's vying for leadership that now has a mandate, which they're not going to probably be able to fulfill, but they have a mandate to form the next government, are acting openly in collusion with forces that are irredentist in Israeli politics to try to undermine and overthrow Netanyahu. And they're doing it by trying to pass a series of massive constitutional amendments to Israel's democratic system that would bar Netanyahu personally from ever serving in politics. So, retroactively canceling the results of the elections, which gave 2.5 million Israelis voted either directly for Likud, Netanyahu's party, or for parties that are aligned with Likud in order for him to remain the prime minister of Israel. And yet they want to retroactively annul those elections. And at the same time that this is happening in the Knesset, you have two other focal points of anti-democratic activity in Israel that are trying to overturn Netanyahu. One is the legal fraternity led by the Attorney General, and the other one is the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court just published an extraordinary judgment yesterday that said that overturned the Knesset's right to its own protocol. So the Knesset protocol says that the Speaker of the Knesset is supposed to be elected sometime before the formation of a new government. And until that happens, the serving chairman of the Knesset or Speaker of the Knesset is supposed to remain in his office. So everything that the Knesset Speaker was doing was in accordance with the Knesset protocol, longstanding 70-year-old protocol. And the Supreme Court announced without any deliberation or debate an hour after the sitting Speaker of the Knesset sent in his written arguments that he couldn't do that and that he had to abrogate Knesset protocols and call for a floor vote on a series of Knesset procedures, of parliamentary procedures in Israel that would lead to his ouster. So these are all unprecedented things that are happening. And of course, like you said, they're happening at a time when the government is completely focused on very basic issues of blocking mass death, preventing starvation, avoiding the complete collapse of the Israeli economy. So all of this stuff is happening in sort of a cascade, where rather than having a loyal opposition, what you're having is an extremely disloyal opposition inside of the Knesset, and you're having this extraordinary judicial overreach, which is pushing Israel to an open confrontation between the elected branches of government, the executive, and the parliament, and the unelected justices of the Supreme Court. So this is something, this has been brewing for decades in Israel. I've been writing about it for decades, but it's really coming to the fore right now, and it's not clear how this is going to end, but it's a very, very poisonous environment here politically and, of course, health-wise. One of the things that the judges did was that they decided that everything is just discipline, that they can judge anything. So anybody who wants to petition the court and they care about the petition, they think the petition advances their own power, they take it. So there is likely going to be a petition to the court before the mandate to form a government is transferred from Gantz to Netanyahu, saying that Netanyahu shouldn't have the right to form a government because he's under indictment, which is a completely different kettle of fish. He's indicted for crimes that don't exist in the law book. That's also an invention of our Attorney General. He just invented a concept of bribery that exists nowhere in the world, including in Israel. And then indicted Netanyahu for bribery on the basis of it. So we have this bizarre situation where we're about to get a petition to the Supreme Court to get the courts to order the president not to enact his constitutional duty to transfer the mandate to form a government to the prime minister. And they may very well do that, given what they did today. There's no reason to doubt that they will. And then you'll have this bizarre situation where they're telling the president, as well as the Speaker of the Knesset, that they're not allowed to perform their constitutional functions on the basis of something that they've referred to now as they've invented, called the fabric of democracy. So I think that this could very easily happen in a few weeks. So I'm not at all sanguine about where this is going. I think the best case scenario is what David talked about, but there are other scenarios that are not as good. And when we look at the incredible irresponsibility that's being exhibited by Gantz, the head of the Blue and White faction, and his comrades, it's something to be very, very concerned about. Their capacity to govern, their capacity to make decisions that are rational in times of crisis, which we're steeped in right now. So, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Israelis are very worried about what's happening, and with good reason. And I think it's good for our friends in the United States also to know this, because I think that the more that can be said about the constitutional overreach of our judges and about the constitutional overreach of our Attorney General and of course, I would say the really treacherous behavior of the blue and white leadership in the Knesset, the better. Because I think it's important for people to understand what's happening here, lest it happens somewhere else as well.
That is an explanation a little bit about what was going on behind all the elections. And again, it appears that we have a deal. Caroline also has a pretty good article this week at the Israel Hayom newspaper. They have an English version online titled Israel and the Demise of the Global Village. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about this during my update today. What's happening is that there's all these different views. Everybody's got an opinion about this is leading to a new world order. This is breaking up the old world order. It'll lead to a new old world order, or an old new world order, or something. Everything is very confusing. And so a lot of people think that, at least in the initial stages, it appears that the old world order has broken up. So listen to a little bit of what Caroline says in an article. This was published on Friday. In the face of the steeply rising number of coronavirus patients and the breakneck speed of political changes in Israel, few people have stopped to reduce or to notice that the world we have grown accustomed to living for the past generation is falling apart. So Caroline will be, at least initially, she will be one of our guest prophecy updaters today, because she's talking a lot about what I talk about. So the world is falling apart. The global village is collapsing under the weight of the pandemic. How Israel deals with this dramatic turn of events today and in the coming weeks, months, and years will determine both how we emerge from the present crisis and how we manage in the new world taking form. Israel's food supply is a perfect example of the global changes being wrought by the virus. In Israel, 5 basic foodstuffs are produced locally: fruits, vegetables, eggs, poultry, and milk. Most grains, sugar, rice, salt, meat, and other foodstuffs are imported. Out of a total agricultural workforce of 70,000, 25,000 are migrant workers from Thailand, and another 25,000 are from the Palestinian Authority. So that means 50,000 out of 70,000 workers come from technically outside Israel. According to the agricultural minister, concerns over the coronavirus prevented 1,500 workers from Thailand scheduled to arrive at the beginning of the month from entering the country. The Palestinian workforce is down to 18,000 and dropping due to the quarantine the Palestinian Authority has placed on its population. The labor shortages couldn't come at a worse time. Currently, there are 500 million shekels worth of fruit and vegetables ready for harvest. If they aren't picked in the next 3 weeks, they will rot on the trees and in the fields. And I think this just shows you the incredibly complex things that are going on in the world. That this happens and then it affects 20 other things. 3 weeks ago, the Hashamor Hadash organization began being flooded with calls from farmers for help. Hashar HaAdash is a volunteer agricultural support organization founded in 2007 to protect Israeli farmers from Arab and Bedouin criminal gangs who extort farmers and ranchers and carry out agricultural theft and sabotage on a massive level. These calls were different, the head of the organization said. We are used to receiving calls about sabotage and extortion and sending out volunteers to guard and herd. These calls were about the harvest, the national food supply. Well, she goes on to cite an article, you'll see here in a moment, from the National Review. Cover of the current issue is Pathogen of Destruction. And boy, is that ever an understatement. Caroline goes on to say, in the intervening 6 weeks, she's talking about this article in the National Review has a very detailed timeline of what happened with the virus outbreak in China and how China responded and how China really underplayed everything at the initial stages. China's lying, the extent to which is unknown at this present time. There are a lot of reports that I've seen, I'll reference them in a moment, that are troubling, but Jim Garrity in his article in National Review details this. For example, even in middle part of January, when people knew that this virus was breaking out in the Wuhan area, the World Health Organization, the Chinese government was saying, well, we're not aware that it's transmissible between humans, even though there was very strong evidence at the time. So part of the initial outbreak problem was, whether it's intentional or unintentional, China was lying about it. So Caroline goes this, in the intervening 6 weeks, the Chinese had lied repeatedly about the infectiousness of the virus and jailed doctors and citizen journalists who tried to warn the Chinese people and the world of the danger. Also during those 6 weeks, 5 million people left Wuhan. Scores of thousands of them got on airplanes and flew to Europe and the US, bringing the virus with them. Still today, the Chinese are apparently hiding critical information about the virus from the world. While the Western media heralds the Chinese success in bringing the infection rate down to 0 inside China, if you believe that, I have a Silk Road for you to sell you. Japan's Kyodo News Agency reported this week that the Chinese data are phony. Physicians in Wuhan told the agency's reporters that the reason the rate of infection has dropped to 0 is because the Chinese authorities have barred testing. From 1997, and then she goes on to talk a little bit about what's going on with the EU. And I think this is pretty profound. From 1997 until the coronavirus, Europe's internal national borders were open. Over the past few weeks, 15 EU member states have shut their doors and thrown away the key. Germany, the birthplace of the vision of the European Common Market and nation, initially banned the export of protective medical equipment to its European brethren. When the Italians begged for help, no EU member states sent in medical teams to save their fellow Europeans. If just last month the heads of the European Commission had the last word, just last month, the heads of the European Commission had the last word in all discussions among other EU member states. Today, no one cares what they have to say. As Professor Thomas Jaeger from the University of Cologne told the Los Angeles Times, quote, we're seeing an enormous delegitimation. It's one of those words where I'm struggling with today. In other words, the EU is no longer the legitimate authority, and the longer the crisis lasts, as Professor said, the more nationalism will return. And I think this is a valid point. Caroline also references an article by Russell Mead in the Wall Street Journal that international organizations like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization are playing no significant role in the global fight against the coronavirus. National leaders and agencies who are directly responsible for protecting their people are calling the shots, irrespective of the rules of the World Health Organization and IMF spending guidelines. The coronavirus pandemic has exposed the critical failings of the global village model for international integration. International labor markets, global trade, and international governing institutions have proven vulnerable to shocks, unreliable, and of limited use. It has also reminded us of the foundational truths that have been shunted aside since the end of the Cold War. National borders protect nations. National authorities and fellow citizens are far more reliable and helpful in times of crisis than transnational and international organizations. To survive and protect themselves from global shocks, nations must have agricultural and manufacturing capabilities of their own. China is not a reliable industrial base. Israel's ability to protect itself today and adapt its economy to the new post-global village reality will in large part determine how it survives and prospers in the post-global village now taking shape. So that's one view. There are many other views about how this is going to play out. Another thing that was of interest from the Israeli perspective was Israel's a small country, 8 million people, and this was in the Jerusalem Post last Monday. Thousands of medical staff in isolation, and I think this is what is the concern about this particular virus. I see a lot of arguments that it's just the flu, the regular flu, the seasonal flu kills more. But when I look at the situation, I do not see during regular flu seasons that medical staff by the thousands in a small country like Israel, including up to 1,000 doctors, have had to put themselves in isolation because of the infectious nature of this particular virus. I don't see people being concerned year to year of the overwhelming need for acute care. Now, most people recover from this virus, from COVID-19, but there are a significant percentage that require acute intensive care that is taxing medical systems from New York to Boston and elsewhere. And that's the concern, that if they just let everything run wild, it will overwhelm the healthcare system. Saw an article from a Boston doctor today who was talking about, yeah, we have a lot of medical equipment. Boston's got a great medical system. People come from all over the world to go to hospitals in Boston area. But the problem is, for example, in one hospital, we might only have 1 or 2 ventilators available now because there are other people that are in intensive care units for other reasons that they need them. And so if all of a sudden 1,000 people show up needing a ventilator, it's a major problem, and that leads to very difficult decisions having to be made. So this is a problem in Israel. 3,300, over 3,000 medical professionals, nurses and doctors and others were essentially sidelined as of last Monday from treating patients. And so if the doctor gets sick, I saw a very interview with a doctor, Italian doctor from Bergamo. She appeared to be about 40. She herself was sick. She had been very sick in intensive care. She recovered, but then she says, I have to stay home because I could still infect people even though I've overcome the virus. And so this one's a little bit different than ones they dealt with in the past. Here's an example. El Al has stopped all flights until April the 4th. This has really huge ramifications for the economy of Israel, and this is happening in other countries too, that are heavily dependent on tourism and that sort of thing, that it's completely shut down. And you're seeing unemployment rates in countries now of 20-30%, where they had an unemployment rate of 5 or 6 or 7% a couple of weeks ago. It's collapsing the economies everywhere as everything is shut down. I thought this graphic from the Financial Times of London was kind of interesting. It sort of says a lot. Is the coronavirus going to cause a total eclipse of the world? I think it's okay to be concerned and a little bit fearful about this, because we are, as I talk to people this week, people at the office, a practice group meeting on phone because nobody's in the office. We have offices in Florida and in the Carolinas, and we were talking, and it's people are having trouble wrapping their heads around it. What's going on and what's going to happen, and nobody knows for sure. I thought this, I'm only going to show this for the interesting graphic that it is, as Pope Francis in a virtually empty St. Peter's Square went and prayed. This is this is Friday in Vatican City and St. Peter's Square, and if the Pope does this on a regular Friday, there'll be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people there. And here he is with maybe one priest and a couple other people in the whole square. He did pray, praying in a desolately empty St. Peter's Square. Pope Francis on Friday likened the coronavirus pandemic to a storm laying bare illusions that people can be self-sufficient, and instead leaves all of us fragile and disoriented and needing each other's help and comfort. Lord, may you bless the world, give health to our bodies, and comfort our hearts, he prayed. He then went to a icon of the Virgin Mary and prayed in front of the icon. It was an icon brought from the St. Mary Major Church in Rome, and also to a crucifix brought from the Church of St. Marcellus in Rome. He gave at the end, he gave the blessing that is traditionally left for for Easter and Christmas holy days. He said this, we have experienced an unexpected turbulent storm. We have realized that we are on the same boat, all of us fragile and disoriented, but at the same time important and needed. All of us now called to row together, each of us in need of comforting each other, the Pope said. So this is, he also kissed a crucifix that was brought out, that became revered because of the plague that hit Rome back in the 16th century. Incredible scenes that we're seeing in an empty world. Of course, the chart, this was Friday, 607,000 confirmed, 28,000 total deaths. I think that was, I take it back, that was Saturday morning, about 6:45, and then this morning at 3:11 a.m. I captured this. So the deaths had risen from 28,125 to 30,857. This virus has had incredible impact. Satellite photos from measuring nitrogen dioxide pollution levels. You can see the colored areas over Wuhan, China area between January 19th and March 8th. And they essentially disappeared. They went away. Now they say it has it under control. Here's a little bit better picture, NO2 emissions in Wuhan, China. What you would see from January 1st to 20th. And then you can see that the pollution clouds, and China has some of the most polluted air anywhere, virtually disappeared. And that was because China shut down industrial production. When China shut down production, that caused an economic contagion, a virus, if you will, to be unleashed throughout the world economy. And a lot of the financial, I know people want to blame the media and hype and all of this stuff. When the leading industrial country in the world shuts down for a couple of months, that causes supply chain disruptions. It caused a drop in the price, a drop in demand for oil, which has led to the oil price dropping and continuing to drop. And it's essentially because of that shut down the shale industry in the United States that had helped get us to be energy independent. The conclusion, this is from the National Post of Canada yesterday, China wants to control the message, and China has been very clever in the way that they have put the message out there. It has made them look like we're the savior of the world. We're providing you with masks and medical equipment and that sort of thing. Of course, in a couple countries that they delivered masks to, they had to throw them away because they were defective. So it's China is you need to understand the way to interpret what China is saying is to first, if their lips are moving, they're probably lying, and that it's all propaganda to make themselves look good. Look at what the glorious leader, and you can see posters around China, with a big heart and the picture of Xi Jinping, saying, look, the wonderful leader, we love our wonderful leader who's led us out of this crisis. Now, this picture at the bottom is a truck, and there are reports coming out from, I saw a video this morning, purportedly from a Chinese doctor, that said they have brought in portable crematoria that can, and they've hooked them up directly to the hospital. You have those chutes for construction trash when you're redoing things, and you can just dump the body right into the crematoria. They can do 30 bodies a day. Now, what's this a picture of? Well, one, it was able to be verified, one mortuary in Wuhan got a shipment of 5,000 urns. There are about 7 such mortuaries which would mean there was 35 to 40,000 urns recently delivered. If other mortuaries got the same delivery, that would mean 35 to 40,000 urns delivered in very short term to these mortuaries. That might indicate a much higher death rate than what, a number of deaths than what China has indicated. And nobody can figure out the death rate. Around the world, everything is shutting down. This is from the Arab News. Ghost town Beirut, troops patrol streets in virus curfew crackdown. Lebanon is shut down. Lebanon is very economically and politically fragile at the present time. And so one of the things that people are concerned about, what governments are going to fail during this process. Elsewhere, Italy, this is reports out of Italy. Italy loses 39 health workers on front line as medics battle to stem the tide of infections. In Kosovo, infighting and virus caused political chaos. In East Asia, calls for Hong Kong curfew as Tokyo on the brink of explosion. And everybody points to Hong Kong's doing well, Singapore's doing well. Why can't we be like them? South Korea is doing well, but I can tell you that Singapore is now on lockdown. Hong Kong is that way, and Tokyo, and the people in Tokyo are very concerned that they will have an explosion of cases that will overwhelm their healthcare system there, even though they probably have a better emergency capability like that does. In London, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced that Britain was going to be closed to stop the spread of the virus. In this morning's New York Times, this picture of a travel terminal and rail terminal in New York City, one person walking through it. And the title of the picture is The Great Empty. These are things that we have just never really seen in our lifetime. This is in London. Builders and commuters make a mockery of staying 2 meters apart. On the left, you see a picture of construction workers and builders. On the right, you see people on the London Underground, on the tube. After they were told to stay 2 meters apart, they're crowded into subway cars because they don't have the capacity for people to move around. When I saw a good article that talked about one of the problems, or one of the things you want to avoid with this virus is viral load. In other words, if you're exposed to 20 people with the virus, you're going to get it worse. If you're only exposed to one person with the virus, you may not get it. It may not have that big of an impact on you. So that's why they're trying to keep apart. That's why they don't have sporting events. That's why they don't allow things to happen. And I'll show you a video of how this thing can spread near the end of my talk here this morning. Another thing that people said was, well, the virus will burn out in warm weather. The warm weather will kill it. And no sooner did I started seeing all these articles than I see this, the Hindustan Times in Delhi with pictures of thousands of people trying to commute and get away. And Prime Minister Modi shutting down India, and 1.4 billion Indians are on lockdown. And if you go out on the street, you can get beat up or shot. And there's plenty of pictures of that happening. But look at the picture of the people trying to get out of Delhi and trying to get away. It's just, these are things that we've never seen. People also said, well, Russia's fine. There's no problems in Russia. Now, on the left, you see this, mortuaries fill up after Spain records 500 deaths in a day. And this is why it's overloading the system. It's overloading the healthcare system. It's overloading the mortuary system. And everybody says, oh, Russia's fine, though. And so here's Putin going to a hospital, and you can see he didn't wear a mask. He wore a full protective hazmat protective suit. And one thing I conclude from that is that he obviously is concerned about this, and yellow does not make him seem taller. That's the other thing that I get out of that. So, so this is happening. Everybody's shutting down, and nobody knows what to do because the shutdown has economic costs, which I'll talk about it in just a moment. Italy's doctors issue a warning. Please learn from us before it's too late. Don't do what we did. The doctor for Angela Merkel tested positive, so Angela Merkel had to have a test. Here's the New York Times, whether you like their editorial policy or not, they've done a very good job, and they're making their coronavirus news content available for free on their website if you want to look at it. But here's some pictures out of Bergamo, Italy, and elsewhere of how they're having to care for people. The doctor that I saw interviewed, she was just overcome a couple times explaining the things that she had to do, the decisions she had to make when there wasn't adequate care. And if someone had any kind of existing medical conditions over 60, they just said, you don't get a ventilator and we hope you recover. And you also see here on the upper right-hand corner, we take the dead from morning till night. So here's a picture of the coffins. You might have seen pictures or videos of military trucks on the streets of Bergamo, Italy, and elsewhere in the Lombardy region. Those were not to bring troops in. They were to brought in to transport hundreds of coffins of dead bodies away. And this is the concern. Los Angeles Times, New York Times, everywhere you look, experts say the growth rate could swamp the hospitals. From yesterday's Los Angeles Times, hospitals fear shortage of ventilators. Reports that the mayor of Los Angeles may shut down Los Angeles till at least past the end of May. These are things, and the term that's sort of been worn out over the last few days, or last few weeks, is unprecedented. These are things that we have not seen. And so everybody wants to argue about, well, they just put down coronavirus in the Italian hospitals, and that inflates the coronavirus deaths. But then it's kind of interesting because I see people, they want to say that the flu kills more people on an annual basis. And that may be true so far, because you could also say that early on in the Spanish flu epidemic, that you could say, well, World War I killed more people than the virus has, but eventually the virus passed it. And then they say, well, look at the CDC statistics on regular flu, how many it kills. And then somebody will say, well, but look at what the CDC projects will happen with us. Well, you can't trust the CDC. They're a bunch of globalist New World Order people. And so what you see is this constant cognitive dissonance and bad arguing, I guess, is what I see. And I don't think anybody's been, by the way, the question is asked, do you know anybody who has the coronavirus or somebody who died of the coronavirus? And I mentioned last Sunday that a couple of my partners, their father had been the first death from coronavirus in Ohio. And then I guess the follow-on question from that is, have you ever seen anyone persuaded to change their mind by a Facebook argument? That's probably rarer than knowing someone that had the coronavirus. Nurses sent to London as the capital faces a tsunami of virus patients. This article from the opinion section of today's Washington Post: who lives, who dies, who decides? And these are very difficult questions. And I've seen people say, just look, if the old people can't take it, let them die. And so these are from people who I would assume are pro-life and everything. They're just making these rather over-the-top statements that I think are very concerning. And by the way, at the judgment seat, your Facebook posts will be able to be reviewed. So you might keep that in mind. I try to keep it in mind, although I'm not so good at it myself. And so this is also from this morning's Washington Post. Americans face an impossible choice: the contagion versus the economy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the economy, because this is a really huge issue. Because I'm a lawyer. I work with businesses. I work with banks, other types of lenders, non-traditional lenders, and nobody knows what's going to happen. I've advocated that there be a payment holiday till we get past this thing on both rent and mortgage payments, but then that hurts people that have rental homes that rely on rental payments for their income. And so everywhere I look, when somebody asked me about it the other day, I said, I personally view this, and I know I upset some people last week, I view this as an existential crisis for the world's financial system. I don't think it's a problem it's certainly not in my lifetime. We are seeing things that we've never seen. And sometimes, we say, boy, I felt pretty good in 2016. I had a good year. Maybe we go back to 2016. And I think a lot of people now are saying, could we go back to the end of December and just start over? Because it wasn't so bad then. But my view is, and this is from the New York Times this morning, supply chains pause brought devastation long before the infections. And this is what I've contended for a long time. I did an interview. In fact, I think I said this back in the end of January, either here or in an interview, that China shutting down had unleashed an economic contagion on the world that was going to take a long time to resolve. And when you look at the graphs there from the Financial Times on the right side of the page, on the right side of the page, you see the graphs that show the drop-off in price of oil and that sort of thing. Just everything is falling. Now, the markets came back a little bit this week, but markets are shutting down or falling all over the place. And you're going to see a bit up and down, but I do not see this thing resolving very quickly at all. I hope I'm wrong. I'm just trying to be a realist. I thought that the world was going to have a crash at some point because it was largely built on huge amounts of debt. Companies in the stock market are $10 trillion in debt. It's unprecedented. And so a lot of that taking on debt, and then they're using that debt to buy back their stock, which makes their earnings look better per share, and then the executives get bigger bonus. And so the whole system is just completely gone haywire, in my view. And I do not know how that goes out. So the first chart in the upper left is restaurant bookings have collapsed. You see the drop-off in restaurant bookings? And then you move over right there, the retail world takes a hit, okay? And then global flight numbers below that have plummeted. I mean, this is just things that you've never seen. Talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Here's a large map of the world, which has some of the world leaders that have been diagnosed with the coronavirus. Rand Paul in the United States, a top minister in Brazil, Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Prince Charles in the UK, a couple other ministers, I think the health minister and another important minister of Boris Johnson's in the health-related area have all tested positive for the coronavirus. And we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, like I said, most people, the vast majority of people will recover, but the people that get slammed with this thing, maybe because of viral overload, are going to have major problems. Another problem is this oil price war compounds Gulf state woes. Goldman spends $1.9 billion to get things up. The oil price has collapsed. It's down near $20 or so a barrel. I've heard that it could go to $10 a barrel. I saw gas this week for $1.35. Now people are running to gold. Goldman Sachs, in kind of a unusual move, told everybody to buy gold. And of course, that's having an impact on the gold price, although it seems like the gold price isn't moving. And the right-hand page, you don't need to zoom in, great liquidity crisis strikes systems as the bank steps back. And what you're seeing is all over the place, businesses are hoarding cash. General Motors tapped $16 billion in credit lines, maxed out its credit lines to have cash. When trouble people hoard cash, or they hoard the digital version of cash in their bank accounts because they don't know how long this is going to go on. They don't know when they're going to be able to resume. Honda just extended their shutdown for a period of time. On the left, this is a little bit what I talked about last week. Business is set to withhold rents and fight for survival. When a business sits down and looks at these things and says, I have this expense, this expense, this expense, rent is going to be way down the list. And here's one of the problems in the world today is, and I'm an attorney, and so I'm on a lot of email lists for courts, and I'm getting email after email after email from this court, this judge, that judge. And I think in Franklin County here in Columbus, where I work, mostly the municipal court, which would handle evictions, has said we're not doing anything for 90 days. So people will take advantage of that. They won't pay their rent. But good luck on the landlord going down and getting any relief or getting the person evicted, because they're not going to do anything for 90 days. And then when it starts back up, you're going to have a flood of things that go into the court. So some of us attorneys have been talking about some of the things that we anticipate that the courts are going to do. And I was on a conference call in a case with a judge's staff attorney and some other attorneys the other day, and the staff attorney just said, we don't really know what we're going to do when this starts back up. I don't know if they're going to have to get attorneys to come in as volunteers, but the whole system is just falling apart. I really, when I look at it from a legal, financial standpoint, I've never seen anything so complex, and I have no idea how it resolves itself in any span of time. And last week I said I did not expect it to resolve itself in my lifetime. Maybe I'm a pessimist. When I say resolve itself, I mean go back to the way it was. This is going to change people's view of supply chains and just-in-time inventory and that type of thing, but they can't change that overnight because we've been doing that so long. There's been a complete slump in the mortgage market, commercial real estate, mall after mall closed. I mean, all those malls are financed. The stores that pay rent are not open. They're not paying rent. The developer can't pay the bank. And it's just a cascade. Here's an interesting article about the implications of an oil price crash for Russia. And the situation for Russia is not good. Right now, the price of oil, because of lack of demand, has dropped. Some countries, like the United States, have bought massive amounts of oil to shore up their strategic oil reserves. That's good. Buy low. But the problem is that now, because they're pumping so much oil, there's no place to store. There's nobody buying it, and there's no place to store it. So they're going to have to stop pumping it, even in Russia and Saudi Arabia. Norway is heavily dependent on oil revenues for its national wealth. Their sovereign wealth fund dropped in value over the last month, $100 billion, or 100 billion pounds. It's a huge loss for a country the size of Norway, which has, what, 4 or 5 million people, maybe. Here's a little, this is a picture, this is sort of the coronavirus cases and how it's grown, and then the impact on air routes and the number of grounded aircraft, which are now up to, I think, around 4,500 worldwide. And the flights that are going. Here's the United Airlines route map before and after the outbreak of the coronavirus. Routes are shut down. You see picture after picture of people with the, so you see here on in the lower left, you see the empty planes that are flying. You can't continue to do that. You see airports all over the world with the planes parked like that. But you just don't park a plane like you park your Chevy or Prius or something if you're not going to drive it for a while. You got to do all kinds of maintenance. And so you see here, 28% of global passenger jets are currently parked. And if they really did it based on capacity, it would be 60 or 70%. So here's a picture of I think it's a Delta flight, and you see just a few people on the plane. And this is typical. That looks like what I used to fly after 9/11. Here's California. California, the viruses are, it's growing, it's an increasing problem, and it's also leading to prisons and jails releasing prisoners. Now, mostly they are nonviolent people that were sort of on the borderline for parole that they kept in, but now they're deciding to move them out because the close quarters in prison, and I have in case you didn't know, I have a master's degree in correctional administration and worked for a time in the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute. And these dormitories are big rows of bunk beds, guys up and lower. There's, you don't even have to spread your arms out to hit the bunk across the aisle. And when things go the wrong way, virus can spread very, very quickly. Jails are holding people that have not yet been convicted in a lot of cases. And if they've waived their right to a speedy trial, they're being released on reduced bail or their own recognizance. And the courts are not doing any jury trials in most cases for at least 90 days. So and I know that there's concern about them releasing people from jail and prison like this, but then again, the concern is that if they stay there, it could be a death sentence. And I don't think anybody wants to be the politician if something like that happens. That may not happen. World leaders are taking advantage of this. There was a big G20 summit that was supposed to be held in Saudi Arabia. It was held by teleconference this week. And of course, some world leaders are wanting to take advantage of this. Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister of the UK, back during the time of the 2008 financial crisis, came out and said, we need global government. We need somebody in charge of this to bring this about. And so as Christians and Bible prophets, we know that there's a coming world leader. And really, when you look at the landscape, that's what I keep thinking is, myself, I keep thinking like, it would be great if somebody could just come in, if somebody had a plan and the answers. And if somebody did, I think the world would follow after him. So that's just, like I said, the auto industry is shut down. Occidental Petroleum, which has made a big play on shale oil, they've cut pay as much as 30%, and they're going to cut even more in the near future because the shale industry is completely, as far as I know, the oil rigs in the United States and shale oil drilling facilities are completely shut down across the country. There are concerns about is this an insurable event? People have business interruption insurance. A lot of times it will exclude things for a pandemic, and a lot of times your casualty policy requires property damage. But then the legal question becomes, well, if your property is filled with a virus and you have to shut down for health reasons, is that damage to property? So I can tell you that it will be a very busy, once this thing clears, and I think it will, but there's going to be a lot of litigation over insurance coverage, the interpretation of insurance policies. Regulators have come out and say lenders should go easy on struggling firms. Apple's considering holding back its production of 5G iPhones. I saw a chart, a local company around here, Dollar General, has $240 million in cash to fund operations. There was a chart, like the leading company in the world is Ralph Lauren, who has like 400 days. They can fund their operations for like 400 days with the cash they have. Apple has about $275 billion in cash. They could fund their operations for about a year if they didn't sell anything. But that just shows you how much it costs to run a company like Apple. $275 billion would only operate for a year. Dollar General just built a huge warehouse not 10 or 15 minutes from the church here. They have $240 million. I asked my wife, so how long do you think Dollar General can operate with $240 million? And she said, I have no idea. And I said, 4 days. So you need to understand that this is, the longer the shutdown goes, the worse it's going to be on the economic side. Everybody knows that. And people are taking that into calculations when they're making these shutdown orders. But on the other side, you have the health problem. Now there's fear that things are going to go. Here's a New York Times article. We have lost it all. Millions real from sudden unemployment. I heard Kirk Herbstreit on ESPN say, we don't think there's going to be NFL or college. He doesn't think there's going to be NFL or college football this year. The golf courses are shut down. They're even trying to keep people out of parks from getting exercise. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. But if you look on the left-hand side of the page, you see unemployment claims over time, the chart. And on the right, you see the spike of unemployment claims going all the way up the page. In 1 week, about 3.5 million unemployment claims were filed. Unbelievable stuff. Here's an article I saw this morning. This is from the Times of London. Charities face fundraising apocalypse. These are not the words. These are not the words that I'm using. These are the words that secular people are looking. And then you have this decision. President Falwell at Liberty University said that 4,000 or 5,000 students could return to campus for education. A parent criticized President Falwell when he was talking about having people coming back, and President Falwell's response on Twitter was to call the father, the father of 3 students at Liberty, called him a dummy. So I think it's not a very wise decision to do that. If they come back, somebody gets sick and passes away, Liberty may end up a parking lot. It's an all-in bet, and I question the wisdom of it. I understand everybody wants to get back to work, believe me. My wife sent me a picture of this lady out in the garden, and she had dug about a 3-foot by 7-foot square hole. And the guy goes, I see my wife's working on her garden. I wonder if she's doing potatoes. And it was about the size of a coffin that she had dug. So, and so they said there's going to be a lot of babies born from the coronavirus. There's going to be a lot of divorces. So this is a graphic from the New York Times showing sort of how the Wuhan flu virus spread from China. Of course, the Senate approved a $2 trillion virus response. Somebody looks through that and tells me exactly how that's going to benefit small businesses exactly. I'd like to see it was, as you would expect with our people in government, it funds a lot of their pork and that type of thing. For example, I think the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in D.C. got $25 million, and then the report was that almost everybody at the Kennedy Center was laid off. So this is, look, the government doing the same things. Apocalyptic surge at New York Hospital, that's another thing that you see. I think the other thing that people are concerned about is this is going to be used for instituting AI tracking information. This is a drone video taken in New York that has the capability of measuring people's temperature. And here's an article from the Arab News just this morning. Thermal drone to monitor temperatures of shoppers in a section of Saudi Arabia. And these things are being done. And everybody says, the mark of the beast and all this stuff, and they're going to track me. But listen, without the mark of the beast, I'm going to show you tracking technology videos now One tracks students who were at spring break in Florida. So this is a map that they've made with the access they have to cell phone information, and the light areas are cell phones and the signals that they get off. So they're going to focus on one beach in Fort Lauderdale, and then they're going to show, this is a company called Tektronix, and Tektronix is going to show you, by tracking the cell phone signals, the identifiable, every cell phone is a tracking device, unique to that phone. And what you will see is they're going to take that one beach in Fort Lauderdale, and they're going to show what happened over the last 2 weeks with those students down there at those big parties, having their Corona parties and drinking on the beach and partying with each other. And you've seen the videos. I'm going to get Corona, so I'm going to party while I have the chance. So now they're going to take the cell phones from that individual tracking, and they're going to show, and you can see the lights there. This shows where those cell phones tracked across the United States in a 2-week period. Now that's before there's any chip or anything like that. That's what they can do right now. So I know everybody gets upset. There's going to be vaccines. They're going to chip you with the vaccines, and they're going to be able to track you. And my contention is they already are. New York Times has been reporting on it and has been concerned about it. Here's another video. This is going to track the people that came into New York, and they said, okay, we're going to shut New York down. So what happened? And the president was going to shut down New York and New Jersey. People in New York hit the road. Been tremendous number of people end up in Florida, Rhode Island. Rhode Island's threatened to go door to door to find New Yorkers who are hiding out. And so this is what happened after they announced that they were shutting down New York. And what you'll see is that in that period of time, they were able to track where all those people went from New York after the shutdown was announced. Do you see the problem? But do you see the fact is that it's already able to track everybody. And I know people that are talking about getting rid of cash, and everybody's upset about that. And I don't know when it entered I often wondered, we ought to go back and research when things entered the Bible prophecy lexicon, like coming cashless society. Because everybody says, well, they're going to get rid of cash. And I'm like, but the thing in Revelation is you can't buy or sell without a mark. It says nothing about there being cash or no cash. I personally think the Antichrist would probably take cash. Might even take gold, but you're not getting anything unless you got the mark and you'd agreed to worship him. That's the more important thing. But maybe it's a coming cashless society, but somehow that entered the Bible prophecy lexicon. I don't know whoever said that first should have copyrighted that phrase and charged $1 for everybody that's used it since, because he could buy a lot of gold and he wouldn't need cash at that point. So another thing that's coming out of this, and this is the big concern of people, this is from Financial Times yesterday, their weekend magazine, the battle to control the internet. And the concern is that China is being very, very clever the way they're using this viral outbreak to clamp down on control of the internet going forward. They've advanced some new protocols for addresses, IP addresses on the internet. And China says, well, we're just trying to help out with the technical side of this. We have no ulterior motives. It's all going to be for the good of humanity. It says this: on a cool day last September, half a dozen Chinese engineers walked into a conference room in the heart of Geneva's UN district with a radical idea. They had 1 hour to persuade delegates from more than 40 countries of their vision, an alternative form to the internet to replace the technological architecture that has underpinned the web for half a century. At the gathering held at the International Telecommunications Union, a UN agency that establishes common global standards for technologies, they presented a simple PowerPoint. It didn't bother with much detail on how this new network would work. or what specific problem it was solving. Instead, it was peppered with images of futuristic technologies, from life-size holograms to self-driving cars. And they said, we only mean it to help humanity. We're not going to use it to advance Chinese Communist Party goals. So, how will the world look after the coronavirus pandemic? Here is a maybe now I know why. Excuse me. I know why my mother told me to sit down and shut up and quit talking so much. I'd wear out my voice. But there's a lot of different views as to how the world will look. Richard Haass, excuse me. Richard Haass at the Foreign Policy, he's a big globalist, head of the Council on Foreign Relations, and says his conclusion is many countries will have difficulty recovering with state weaknesses and failed states becoming more prevalent. This is Bill Gates in a Reddit conference, online conference the other day. They asked him a question, what changes are we going to have to make to how businesses operate to maintain our economy while providing social distancing? And Bill Gates, this is a direct quote of his 9 days ago, eventually we will have some digital certificates to show who has recovered or been tested recently, or when we have a vaccine, who has received it. In Turkey, they have, you've seen a rise of anti-Semitism. This is a concern. My friend Brian Schrager has an article coming out soon on the rise of anti-Semitism in connection with this virus outbreak. So it says here, this is from the Begin Sadat Center Perspectives paper, March 24th. Turkey and coronavirus, devout Muslims will defeat the Jewish plot. And here is a tweet from Prime Minister Erdogan. And he says, and the tweet translated, I am asking Allah Almighty to end this difficult process as soon as possible on the occasion of Merak Night, and to restore all humanity to health and peace. And the video that's playing on the right, he says, no enemy is superior to the unity, togetherness, strength, and power of our nation. Hopefully we will overcome this coronavirus threat in unity. And Turkey was kind of slow on the uptake. There's also concerns that this is going to break out in the refugee camps. People have noted that there hasn't been a big breakout among homeless populations in the United States. And I think the reason for that may be that if you've been to San Francisco or Seattle, and people avoid contact with the homeless populations. So there's already social distancing built in with the way most people deal with them. And this editorial from the Arab News this morning, showing the international aid sort of being siphoned off by the Iranian leadership and not really getting to the people. And then finally, the Gatestone Institute, coronavirus, the European Union unravels. Listen to some of this. Second paragraph, ever since the threat posed by the coronavirus came into focus, Europeans have displayed precious little of the high-minded multilateral society that for decades has been sold to the rest of the world as a bedrock of European unity. The EU's unique brand of soft power, said to be a model for a post-national world order, has been shown to be an empty fiction. So the question is, what, in terms of Bible prophecy, has this slowed things down? Has it accelerated them? And as I look at everything, I just see a world of confusion. Nobody knows what to do. Everybody is concerned. And everybody, I think, and I've said it myself, I wish somebody could tell us what to do. I saw a quote this week. I researched it and it was accurate. It was from the Minister of Health, who's an ultra-Orthodox Chabad, ultra-Orthodox Jewish man in Israel. And he said, translate, they asked him, what are you going to do? How are we going to solve this problem? And he said, we hope the Messiah will be here by Passover. Very interesting, because they're looking for it. Everybody is really looking for the man with the plan who can solve really a seemingly unsolvable world problem. I don't think I've ever seen the world more set up for it. But it's also interesting, and a friend of mine, I'll give credit to Eric, had, I think, a very insightful thought in a post he made the other day. And he said, it's very interesting. Passover's coming up it's next week, next Sunday, isn't it? I think it's next Sunday, or next week. That's in a week or so. And Israel's on lockdown, and they're going to be on lockdown till then. And it's getting more and more oppressive. But his point was, they were facing a plague in Egypt, and they were told to go inside and shut up the doors. And now the same thing is happening. And so will there be a spiritual revival, correct spiritual revival as a result of this? I don't know. It's a very interesting time to be alive. So don't lose hope. I know Jesus is coming, and I know however I get out of here, I'm okay. And I wish everybody else would be too. So let's pray. Father, we just thank you for your word. Thanks for the glorious truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that we can believe and be redeemed from our sins and have the assurance of being with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, forever. Just pray that you give us opportunities to share that hope with people around us and to minister to those around us as opportunity presents. Bless us, keep us safe. In Jesus' name, amen.